The Prime Minister began this week with some big revelations, announcing his plan to create Canada's first sovereign wealth fund, which will be used to help finance construction of major projects of national interest. And then tabling a spring economic update to show the country's in a better than expected economic and fiscal position. But as the week ground on, there were some big obfuscations, as the immigration minister failed to answer questions about how a man with terrorist ties was able to make it into Canada, and the Liberals used their new majority to force committees to meet behind closed doors.
Mr. Chair, we have just come out of a motion in the House that has amended the standing orders, and I'd like to take some time to consider this with the committee. I'd like to move a motion to move the committee in camera.
I'm going to suspend while we change over to in-camera. Meeting is suspended.
With that, I move to have the meeting in camera.
I would like our colleague to explain to us why she wants to go in camera, if she can explain.
I appreciate it, so I will ask the clerk to take the vote, please.
As we have a number of studies to consider and we want to be working well together as a team, I would like to suggest that we move in camera.
We will not be silenced. We've had where one Liberal member has occupied the committee business for how long, and to simply be trying to close off and to bring zero debate is wrong.
MP Deschamps-Thériault has moved the motion that we move to drafting instructions. Those drafting instructions happen in camera.
This was strategically planned so that it looks a little different to Canadians. But what I would like to say to Canadians right now is that this absolutely is, again, we have never gone in camera.
There's a point of order, please.
This is debate, and the motion is not debatable.
Well, we're going to debate it. Our party insiders are here to talk about all of this. We've got Greg MacEachern. He is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Here with me in the studio, we've got Fred DeLorey, a former Conservative campaign manager, and Melanie, a former communications director for the NDP. We're going to get to the committee stuff, I promise, and we'll do it on camera. I want to start, though, Fred, because I know you love the Fez, rest in peace. The Spring Economic Update, the successor this week. Sovereign Wealth Fund, more revenue than expected, which led to more spending than had been expected. What did you make of what we heard from the government on the fiscal and economic direction this week?
Well, to be fair to my comments on the Fez, it was because it didn't have a narrative when Trudeau was doing it those last few years. There is a narrative here that Carney is trying to push forward, right? That he's getting things moving, that he's getting things done. So at least there's a story they're trying to tell. Now, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work out. I did file my taxes yesterday. I got signed off from my accountant and signed the form and put it into CRA. And I was thinking afterwards, how can I spend more money of my own money and give it to the government? So maybe this wealth fund is how, because I think that's how it seems to be set up.
I think you're one of the people Albie Lewis wants to tax with the windfall tax, right? Because you're that big money
I'm not
guy.
saying I've got that much to spare, but it's just this whole wealth fund. It's interesting, and if it can get things working, it just, we're calling it a wealth fund. When you do that, you're comparing it to what other countries have set up when they have massive surpluses of federal money from resources. We don't have that in Canada. We have massive deficits. So this is not I just don't see how this works as a wealth fund.
Well, I mean, Mel, the mechanisms and how it's going to work, like there's still a lot of stuff we don't know. Like, how do we invest in it? Should we choose to invest in it? What's my incentive as opposed to going to Standard & Poor's index funds or something like that, But it is, using resources to help future generations of Canadians while training them to work in the trades. It's just all got to pay off, right? It's all got to work.
And interestingly, it happened while I was at the Canada's Building Trades Union on Monday. So it was an interesting announcement to start to kind of unpack while we were there. Same kind of thing that you've kind of said. It's interesting. It's something different. Obviously, they're trying to say other countries are doing it, but to Fred's point, in the kind of opposite way. So how this works and how people lean in and how it actually benefits people is very murky, is very complicated to explain, and it's hard to understand. And I think that points to one of the problems with the policy piece. If I have no sweet clue what it is that you're talking about, it'll be really hard to get people on board. And I think that's one of the difficult pieces coming out of that. As it relates to the other stuff in the what are we calling it? The SE
Spring Economic Update. Law and Order SEU.
Economic Update. Thank you. Listen, there was some things in it that were interesting. The skilled labor stuff, obviously, being one of them. We keep talking about, we keep saying at this table that, you're talking about how we're investing in industry, how we're investing in economy, but people don't actually see the benefit of what it means in their everyday life. And I'll point to that same conference. We keep hearing about the promise of jobs, but not actually seeing the jobs. This is going to help that. So I think obviously very popular in that room and hard to say that it won't matter or benefit a lot of people.
Yeah, so this is the $6 billion we're talking about over 5 years to help train and get hired between 80 to 100,000 skilled trades workers. And it's real stuff if you're a young person looking to go into the trades, right? Your employer gets a $10,000 wage subsidy for taking you on as an apprentice. When you're in the mandatory training component of your training, you get a $400 a week income top-up on top of EI. And when you finish your Red Seal training, you get a $5,000 completion bonus, right? So it gets you in, supports you through it, rewards you when you get out. And Greg, if everything goes well with the major projects and the Sovereign Wealth Fund and that comes on stream, there will be a big project for you to work on. But there's this chicken and the egg thing that you need the projects to incentivize the workers, but you need the workers to build the projects.
Yeah, but overall, the spring economic update, I don't remember one in my lifetime that has been this impactful. I can't think of another, frankly.
Because they've been in the fall, Greg. But I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
With a really straight face.
I'll give you that.
He's been rehearsing that all day, right?
Anyway. No, I wish. Look, I think I said last week about how this was a chance for the Prime Minister to talk about the domestic agenda, and that's what it is. It also is, reminding people, I hate to say that, things are great, and I'm not, definitely saying that, but the economy is doing better than, say, we thought it might be a year ago. On the skills front, I used to work a lot on this file about 10, 12 years ago. And David, you remember at the time of Muskrat Falls, and at the same time, there was huge growth in Alberta and not a lot of skilled laborers. And since that time, we've really lost the consensus around immigration. So we have to have, until we get that back, we've got to be growing, enough people in the trades to be able to do this. And the Red Seal issue, I think you talked about this week with perhaps Patty Haidu, is that not everyone finishes that process. So this is kind of a carrot indeed to kind of finish it. But, we're talking about things like the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I think that is about what the government is hearing, that Canadians want to play a part. They want to participate. And also it's a way that Canadians will benefit from resource extraction. And if you talk to people around government, they'll point to similar programs in Quebec, Alberta, Norway, where they want this to work. But we can feel and we can see that there's a little bit of friction, a little bit of conflict about this, and the government has to be aware that that's what drives opposition pursuits. It drives media attention, and we hit 2% of GDP for our NATO spending a few weeks ago, and no one, even that week, at the end of the week, no one really wanted to talk about it.
Well, we don't really have a detailed accounting of how they got there yet, right? This is part of the problem. There's not, we know they've hit the target. We've been told they hit the target by NATO, but there's no full transparency on all of it, right? There's a lag. That's why. Because what do you talk about other than the target being hit?
Well, we could ask people to come on camera and give those answers, and if they're not coming on, you pursue it. But again, the spring economic update was about the domestic agenda. I think in a lot of ways, it hit that bullseye.
All right. Okay. So on the domestic agenda, the Prime Minister did a series of interviews this week, sort of around the one-year anniversary of the election. He spoke with Adrian Arsenault, he spoke with Joël Denis Bellavance from La Presse, and he also spoke with the Canadian press and said first to J.D. Bellavance that he, in his view, an Alberta pipeline is more probable, Fred, than possible. Being very optimistic on the idea of a pipeline to Tidewater, saying it again to the Canadian press. So he said it now in two big interviews, in French and in English, as things, they've moved past the deadline with the Alberta, but it hasn't fallen apart. What do you make of that note of optimism coming from the Prime Minister on a pipeline to Tidewater?
Well, I think that's one of the main streams through Prime Minister Carney's time in office is raising expectations is not something he's ever shied away from. He's been very clear. It's his narrative. It's his message. He's going to get these things done. So I'm not surprised to hear this sort of thing. Even if the deadlines aren't met, they're still negotiating. They're still having those conversations and trying to do it, because you can tell both sides want to get it done. And unless he's really fooling us, but I don't think he is. But that's the optimism, I think, is welcome, and I think he should be trying to get things done and build big things in this country. And again, it's time is going to tell. That's going to be the judge of this in a few years' time, what has moved and what's done. But again, his messaging seems to be very much aligned to keep moving forward.
Right, but Mel, that is in and of itself a shift, right? Because like Tim Hodgson would say multiple times that there isn't a proponent, there isn't a project. We're having a conversation to get to one. But this moves it from hypothetical to probable, to use the Prime Minister's term, and that's a deliberate choice to use that phrasing, it would strike me as.
And you would hope that he's learned some lessons of not, promising the moon and not being able to deliver it as it relates to everything happening with the U.S. I find it fascinating that that he's using language like probable, just because you just take a look at what's happening in BC politics these days, and what's happening with conversations as it relates to First Nations, and the premier there almost, it sounds like losing his caucus over backing away from DRIPA, and what that means in a real sense to building a pipeline to Tidewater. I don't know how you manage the relationships with First Nations along what that looks like.
You have to go south to avoid that, right? Is the only way you can do it, right?
Totally. And that still doesn't sound like that's what he's proposing. So I probable in the context, again, where those First Nations, as those communities are already feeling a little bit threatened because of what we see in British Columbia, I find it very interesting. Again, when we're not really talking about a proponent, or we're not really talking about somebody lifting their hand and saying we want to work with you on this. So I guess maybe he probably knows things that I don't, or that we don't know around the table yet, and maybe those things get announced soon. But yeah, I find it interesting, particularly in the context of, you don't want to promise something unless you're going to be able to deliver on that.
So Greg, this pipeline, obviously, the probable, potential, whatever, a key part of the domestic agenda, as you said, which is what the spring economic update was about. You can see how the skilled trades plan will work. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, as a concept, it seems to allow ordinary Canadians to buy into projects the way institutional investors did. Maybe it's a vehicle for that, but we don't know yet because we haven't seen it. The big macro ideas are clear, but for people to feel it in their micro life, there's this big execution phase in the middle. And that's where traction needs to start going in a pretty big way, right? Because this government has shown it's struggled to execute. And I don't mean like the elected part of the government, I mean the bureaucratic part of the government, and they're under a downsizing and changing things. So what have they got to focus on that element of this whole plan for the next little while?
Well, I think in terms of that execution piece, part of why the deputy shuffle that happened in December and then I believe in March, it was two parts. It was incredibly large and a lot bigger than people anticipated. And it may have put off a cabinet shuffle for a few months. But there's a message there, through those deputies, through the departments, about expectations, from the Prime Minister. In terms of major projects, as I understand it, if you're going to come before, you better have your homework done. Is there an Indigenous element to this? Does it cross provincial borders? You better have some clarity on the research that you've done for that. I think the other aspect is, this is why, when you talk about the details, I think this is why the government was probably telegraphing so strongly not to expect a mini budget the way that some of the fall economic statements have turned into. That, and I know that I'm aware of the new parliamentary budget officer, her criticism around this as well. But I think this is why they were telling us not to expect a mini budget. This is a framing document, and that's what we've got. But there are still questions, and government, whether it's ministers, parliamentary, this is a great role for a parliamentary secretary to start talking about that. And if there is a process here where they're looking for input from stakeholders, they're doing roundtables, this is where they got to get going quick, because the Prime Minister doesn't seem like he has a lot of time for things that aren't moving fast.
Well, yes. I mean, it wasn't a mini budget, but it was still $55 billion in new spending over 6 years, right? Some of that was old programs that were going to expire being renewed. So not new measures, but new money. But there was $37 billion in new measures, most of it aimed at helping Canadians. So look, I want to get to the committee issue and the immigration minister's appearance at committee yesterday, which was a bit of an exercise in not quite delivering some clarity. So we're going to talk committee. So Greg, we're going to kill your audio and video for this. I'm just kidding. Fred, we've seen 4 committees go in camera this week, immediately after the new structures, the new organizations. Stephen McKinnon said earlier today, a lot of this is because of the tactics of the Conservatives on committee. It's going to be met with an equal response. There's been some suggestion that no, it's just housekeeping things that have happened. But, what do you make of this? That all of a sudden the balance has shifted and suddenly cameras and microphones and people are out?
Just a terrible, terrible strategic, stupid move to make. There's people criticism, the Conservatives and others were criticizing that they were taking majority of the committees, which, guys like me are out here saying it makes sense that you're doing it. You have a majority in the House, you should have majority in the committees, there's nothing wrong with it. But then you go and do that. You shut down 4 committees at the same time and put them behind the closed doors and kick out Canadians from being able to watch it. And if the Conservatives or NDP, or sorry, not NDP, the Bloc, if they were wasn't
trigger
a
warning.
If they're causing issues, if you're Liberals and you're in the committee and you want to blame the opposition for acting like clowns, then let them act like clowns. So that whole argument is nonsense. This whole thing is just really, really dumb mistake. It's kind of taken away this whole. I think that their claim that they have a right to have a majority in the committee. It doesn't take it away, but it hurts their cause when they do this sort of silly stuff.
Greg, what is the justification for this, right? Because we asked the House Leader about it today. We invited him on, the Whip on, others to come on the show today, and they were unavailable, maybe legitimately, or maybe they just don't want to have this conversation. I don't know. What do you make of this? Is this just the normal course of things, or is this a new tactic that maybe they might want to reconsider?
Maybe a third choice, a bit of adjustment, perhaps some leftover heat from the Conservative shenanigans at committee for the last, I don't know how long. It goes on a long time. I can recognize that, but I can also recognize the clips you showed, which were really long. Really long.
Yeah, felt longer for some.
That's all they had. They cut off.
But I also think there's a bit of a there's a bit of newness to this because it's a majority. But we can look at a couple of provincial governments that large majorities, super majorities do not guarantee that if you make a decision, the power of your voters being angry about the decision or the behavior. There's a role for the media there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you win on it. Now, I am aware that there is feeling within the government, both elected and staff, that having Liberal MPs look arrogant at these committees is not a great look, and it does not fit with what the Prime Minister is doing and saying to Canadians at the moment. But I also think if you're going to take a look at the bigger picture, committees for a long time have not been what they used to be. They used to be the workhorse of the Hill, produced a lot of great reports. There was a book award given out this week. It's in memory of Shaughnessy Cohen, an MP who died in the House in 1998. Susan Delacourt from the Toronto Star wrote an excellent biography on her. And we have a system that we seem to only want to reward people who get into cabinet. And most people that are elected are not going to end up in cabinet. But if you look at Shaughnessy Cohen, she was chair of the Standing Committee of Justice. She had an amazing, great working relationship with Peter MacKay, for example. If you look at, under the Harper era, James Rajat ran Finance Committee, and they did a lot of good work. But Don Martin, who I'd like to wish continued good health to, when he was a columnist, he got a hold of a binder from the Conservatives, which was all about when they were in government, how to disrupt committees. So I wish people would kind of take a step back, stop doing the petty partisan politics at this, and because this is a role for a lot of MPs to contribute good things for Canadians, But if you get bogged down in this stuff, I mean, I think if this continues to go on, one of two things happen. The issue gets old and bored, but still, there's not a lot of great work being done at committees.
Okay, Greg, we got to stop the filibuster here. I got to get Melanie. I'm just kidding. Like,
and I've been batting cleanup. Yeah. I'll show, David.
Greg is right, Mel. Like the committees have been cartoonishly partisan at times, to use the phrase I spoke with Andrew Scheer about. But I go back to when the majority came in and they moved to do this. There was reassurance. It would be about reaching across and cooperating, and to take the Conservatives at their word. They say they didn't know some of these things were coming. Right? And that's not what was promised.
Right, and it almost looks like the four Liberal MPs were reading a script almost, right, to talk about what
because they
next.
were.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. So not a good look. I also think, like to Greg's point, that committees weren't working. People expect some of those Conservative MPs and Liberal MPs to behave differently. People who are voting for the Conservatives are upset and they don't trust the Liberal government. People who are working for the Liberal or who are voting for the Liberal government expect the Liberal government to be more serious. So when you see something like that, you're not playing to your base in the same way that the Conservatives may be when they're disrupting committee, right? So I think I can't remember if it was Greg or Fred who said or maybe it was you, David, who talked about like the arrogant look of Liberal MPs. That's how it comes across. It comes across as you got the thing. Most reasonable people were like, you know what? You have your majority. This makes sense so that you can get your work done at committees, and then you come and you do this, and it's just like, oh, come on, are you serious? You've just proven anybody who was like, oh, I'm not sure this is the right approach, that they were right and that they should have been taking a look at this a little bit closer. So I think bad luck. You can't afford these silly mistakes, and it was a silly mistake for, I don't think any gains.
Yeah, that was either Greg or Fred, not me, because I don't need that smoke of an ombudsman's complaint on that one. Look, there was a committee that wasn't in camera, and maybe Fred, the immigration minister, would wish it was in camera. But Lena Diab and Gary Anandasangri were at committee taking questions on how a former commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran, designated terrorist organization of a senior rank, was given approval to fly to Canada for the FIFA conference and then denied entry at the last minute. They cite privacy. Now, we know who got rejected and we know why they got rejected. That's what privacy is supposed to protect. Right. What we don't know is who in the government structure allowed it to happen in the first place. And it was a lot of process and passive voice yesterday saying, his approval was canceled. Well, by who? If you didn't know, who made the decision? Like, this is sort of the sort of thing a committee should be able to get an answer on, I believe.
Right, and why can't they be just open and honest about it? Someone made a mistake within the government. Something happened. You don't have to name the official necessarily, but say what process messed up.
Screw-ups happen. It's a human system, right?
And be upfront. I think one of the big issues here is the minister responsible is a terrible communicator, and she's struggled since she's been in cabinet. She's been someone that, when she went into cabinet, a lot of people were surprised. I think the Prime Minister looked at her resume, which looks very solid. I don't think he interviewed her. I don't think he did or if he did, I'd be very surprised because I don't understand how this person made it into cabinet. Or interview people that worked with her in the past, in the provincial government in Nova Scotia where she was a cabinet minister. There's so many stories about her. And there's going to be a shuffle at some point, I imagine this summer before the House comes back in the fall, and I would be very surprised if she remains in cabinet in any way.
Yeah, like Greg, I don't know why. Simple answers or just an admission of we screwed up, and when we realized it, we took efforts to fix it. And there's been some, messages coming my way of like, who cares about this? Like, well, there's a reason Canada designated the IRGC a terrorist organization, and the Iranian diaspora in this country has deep concerns about a commander coming here for any reason, even if it is a World Cup thing. So an explanation on that seems a bare minimum. What do you make of the way this thing has gone?
Well, just to clarify, I'm going from the CBC article. I think both the minister and the deputy did talk about being accountable for this, if I'm correct. Our system of a minister and a deputy minister, the political side, the bureaucratic side, that's supposed to be a check and balance. And I find this one very puzzling because there are so many red flags around this that, like FIFA and security alone. And then the elevation of the tensions and the war that the United States has started with Iran, how this didn't get caught at some point, I find really, really tough to figure out. To me, the one bright spot was the individual in question told state media that he felt insulted. Well, good. I'm glad at least about that.
He also says he made the decision to leave because of the way he was welcomed. So there you go. We're killing the tourism industry.
Said he was on the plane. There's an ultimate accountability, and Fred just referred to what that potentially could be, and that's a shuffle.
Yeah. All right, Mel, I think you're going to get the last word on this, but this is an easy one. Like it's embarrassing. It's a problem. It seems like an easy fix, and they chose not to take it.
Totally. Like even to Greg's point, like the buck stops with me, but so many twists and turns, and well, I didn't know about this, and I don't know who's this to get there that I don't even know that people are hearing that. Like full stop. This was a mistake. As soon as we saw, as soon as somebody flagged it somewhere. Ended it, and we're going to be reviewing our processes internally to make sure that this never happens again. This is what the process looks like. This is what we're going to do to fix it. Period. Game over. Move on to the next subject. And instead, it was like doing backflips to not really do that, which I don't understand. But to your point, the communication of this minister hasn't necessarily been solid from the beginning. So. An exercise in how better communication could have maybe gotten you ahead of this one.
Fred, I'll give you 20 seconds. She used a phrase at committee yesterday saying, I am accountable but not responsible. And I take that to mean the bureaucracy made this decision, and when the political side of government found out about it, they acted. That's the only interpretation I can have of that, unless it's some weird rhetorical.
Yeah, I'm sure it happened way below her level.
Yeah.
She is accountable. It is her file. She is the minister. And this is a hot issue, the entire immigration system in Canada right now. She's not communicating well on it. And I think this summer she'll be held to account.
It couldn't be too far below her level. It had to be deputy minister or director level for sure.
I don't know
but you don't get to sign that document unless you have rank, right? Right. Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to leave it there. Maybe we'll have answers by next Friday. Who knows? Greg MacEachern, Fred DeLorey, Melanie Richer.